Today we have Yasemin Sari, who is a candidate or finished candidate for the PhD at finishing very soon at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Alberta in Canada. Her dissertation is on Heidegger and Arendt. It's called Heidegger versus Arendt, a recognitive politics of nonviolence and invisibility, with lots of funny markings in between, so you have to read it to actually understand what it says. And then her paper today is part of that project, I imagine. I don't know if it's an actual chapter or a standalone paper.
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
It's called An Arendtian Recognitive Politics, the Right to Have Rights as a Performance of Visibility. So she'll talk for, I think the paper was circulated, I hope, if you RSVP'd. She'll talk for 10 minutes, is that about right? And then we'll have a conversation. Great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Roger, and I thank everyone for being here. And I should say that it's been a slice. It's been 3 weeks now since I'm here. I already feel like I've been here forever. So thank you for welcoming me. And this is usually the part at which I explain what I work on, who Arendt is, and what she did, why she did it. Obviously, for this audience, that will not be necessary, but still, as is commonly understood or can be commonly accepted, everybody has a Hannah Arendt, like everybody has their different Arendt, so to speak. And I just want to explain the stake for me in doing this project, so to speak. So the notion for me that has been very important in my work is the notion of responsibility, and in connection to freedom. But responsibility is literally understood in the sense of being able to respond, which comes up in the sense of commitment to the world, commitment to the space that we share with others and how we interact with others. And this notion of responsibility, I think, is very much connected with the notion of equality. And we'll understand what equality is, or what it was for Arendt and for other people, or in the Declaration, so to speak. But if we try to understand responsibility through equality, we can see that an equal responsibility or equality in responsibility does not always hold, because there is no equal ability to respond amongst different individuals, so to speak. And some people cannot. I think there's a lack of ability of responding, and I will try to show that this may be due to some sort of or misrecognition. And the other one is that people just simply do not will to respond. And for that, I don't think we have an imperative, or I don't know if we can have an imperative. So the purpose of this paper, it's a paper that tackles the question of equality and the similar grounding that I find in Marx's and Arendt's critiques of human rights and the demand for universal equality found in the declarations, to put forth that there is an understanding that Arendt gives us of the artificial equality, which must be constructed by way of speech and action, so to speak, or recognition. And we can discuss how this sort of artificial equality presents itself. We'll talk about the membership to a community, or if we may like, organized community, and we can discuss what organized means in this sense, because I'm trying to put forth the distinction between social and political spaces, so to speak, in this paper. But yeah, so I wanted to just show, first of all, that's why it starts with Marx, a long analysis of Marx's critique, because I think they're on a similar footing when it comes to criticizing the rights discourse found in the human rights declarations. So for Marx, the idea stems from the Declaration of 1793, which he takes to show the inherent inequality found in Article 3 of the Declaration, which says all men are equal by nature and before the law. So. And it also further states, the 1795 Declaration further states that equality consists in the law being the same for all, whether it protects or punishes. So this Article 3, operates at a level of a two-sided factuality, if you like. And the first is that the human being, the natural human being, the non-citizen, is equal to every other in this natural capacity. And second, that the citizen, understood as the rights bearer, is equal to every other before the law, However, this time only in and through the capacity of the state and its authority to recognize the rights bearer as worthy of these rights as such. So there are two levels. Well, I say there's a two level of factuality, but you can take it as norm and fact as well. What Marx finds in this article to be problematic is then again the inherent inequality, which is based on the sort of split person that we find in this proposition. So the person, the natural person, as having or possessing the rights of men, the life, liberty, if you like, happiness, but the way in which he calls it, life, liberty, security, and equality are the rights of men, which belong to, for him, to the egoistic individual in their capacity to utilize or to, so to speak, practice certain means to their own ends. So it becomes instrumental and individualistic in trying to satisfy these ends. Whereas the rights of the citizen, which in the text at hand, which is on the Jewish question, it is about freedom of religion, and you can put in freedom of association, and if you like, freedom of speech for us right now. These are the juridico-political rights which pertain to the abstract citizen, or the citoyen, which is supposed to be the true universal human being found in the state. So the problem for Marx is that the way in which the true universal human being understood as the citizen, as having these rights, does not really show us the tension, or does not, so sort of covers over the tension that we find between the split person or the split individual, so to speak. So the political rights of the citizen, he contends, are actually, like, they rest on the rights of the social, economic, and individual human being, which are confined to the private interests and private caprice of the human being, as she's separated from the community. So Marx understands the rights of the citizen, the so-called political rights, to be internally tied to the rights that are exercised by the human being through the rights of men. And herein lies the internal conflict of the individual, for one, as a rights-bearing human being, an individual's rights extend to the arbitrary free choices in her private social life, which in turn determine her socioeconomic relations with other individuals, while two, as the public citizen, her ends are to be understood to be in harmony with the universal laws purported by the state. And this is the point at which the assumption of universal equality presents an internal tension in its articulation. So the instrumentality, is the principle upon which the socioeconomic relationships between individual human beings in civil society rest, and the individual has a right to pursue instrumental ends, insofar as they do not infringe upon another's rights. Space of freedom, that is like free transaction, actually, as he puts it. It's the freedom to buy, sell, and to exploit. It's not novel for the students of Marx, obviously. So what's happening here is that the critique holds water. It is, I think Nancy Fraser once called it, it's an insurpassable critique of liberal rights, and I totally agree with that. But the way in which Marx understands, and this is the distinction between, I think, Marx and Arendt, the way in which he understands political is basically resting on the notion of domination and ruling. So while he does an amazing job about how to differentiate between political and social or like universal rights, the way in which we can understand recognition in his context becomes very individualistic. So what happens is that in the background, he criticizes the Hobbesian, in McPherson's words, like the possessive individualist person who is just trying to pertain their ends. But he only sees, in criticizing this, he does not see the political or the truly universal human being to be capable of a public personality or public personhood. So the problem emerges when the self-recognition of the citizen, so he will call this like, I need to, or like the individual person has to recognize the abstract citizen in themselves and become a truly social and universal human being. But the problem is that through true human emancipation, which surpasses the political emancipation of the human being, puts her in opposition to her natural self in society. So this is a valuable insight, for one, but it doesn't sufficiently explain the relationship between the process of recognition and human rights understood in a public sense. So for Marx, to recap and then go on to Arendt, one only needs to have self-recognition, recognizing the citizen, the natural human being, in order to be recognized in public. And this self-recognition is the condition of a truly self-making subject who's sovereign to her actions. And at this point we can also point out or remind ourselves that Marx is still coming from a sort of Enlightenment tradition where freedom for him was understood as rational self-determination. So because of the conditions under the capitalist mode of production, so to speak, which seem to affirm some sort of equality and freedom, we can see that this was not the case because we don't have this sort of social equal setting. And if I'm not sovereign to my actions or my ends, like the outcomes of my actions, then I cannot be understood to be genuinely free for Marx. So for Marx, this is where the human being's true universal equality lies, in their universal capacity to produce and express themselves. It's also a very productive and objectifying sort of understanding of self-making. The problem, however, is that the self-producing or self-making subject remains at an individualistic level, where the subject does not need to appear as a worldly being, as one who appears to others. And while what is at stake here is the freedom of a self-making subject, whose recognition by others does not seem to play a role in this freedom. So equality can be understood, like we cannot understand equality in the way in which they're given to us by the declarations, but it will have to be understood in this sort of universal, almost metaphysical or anthropological notion of human being who can produce non-coercively or in a non-coerced fashion. So the point coming to like the Arendtian side of this is that coming to Arendt, like how do we understand Arendt now, is that we need to have still, even though the declarations or the certain articles about the universal equality of human beings rest on a problem or a tension, on a aporia, as she'll call it, we still want to understand some sort of equality. And this will be, the way in which we can understand this will be by way of artificial equality, which is literally constructed in a space with other people, in conversation, if you like. So Arendt's criticism of human rights starts from, well, I'll just give you snippets of this, but there are certain things that I think are very important, at least to show what is at stake, is again coming from her own understanding of politics or the political. And for Arendt, the existence or reality of politics or the political does not inhere in the particular human being. Rather, she argues that politics or the political exists only insofar as it exists between human beings. So following this, if it was Marx who decidedly announced and urged that philosophy become this worldly, then it is Arendt who actually responded to this urgency. And Arendt's response lies in how she takes up the question of recognition by showing the problem with the notion of universal equality of the human beings in the abstract. So, but what does she have to offer us? So, in the Origins of Totalitarianism, she states, and I quote a little extensively, because I think it's a beautiful one, "We became aware of the existence of a right to have rights, and this means to live in a framework where one is judged by one's actions and opinions, as well as the right to belong to some kind of organized community, only when millions of people emerged who had lost and could not regain these rights because of the new global political situation." So this is the statement where her conception of a right to have rights makes its first appearance, and she does not merely assert that this right to have rights exists, but that we became aware of its existence. So coming from Arendt, this is not just a colloquial or light use of we, but this we points to a voice through which the voicing of the concerns of the children of enlightenment, if you like, there becomes a we. And this is going back to, I think I have to point this out because this is one of my favorite texts still, I think, to this day, Kant's, what is an answer to the question, what is enlightenment, which he starts with the exit from men's or the human being's self-incurred tutelage is, what is it? The enlightenment is the exit from men's self-incurred tutelage. But tutelage is, comes from, he says Unmündigkeit in German, which is like tutelage and immaturity, but it also comes from Mund, so like mouth. So Unmündigkeit, I think, could be understood also as a lack of voice or being not being able to speak one's mind, so to speak. So yeah, that's a little side remark. So Arendt says that this right to have rights can only be guaranteed by humanity itself, but then she says this may not even be possible. But I want to understand this to be possible, and I want to think of this humanity as not just as a metaphysical principle of humanity, but as the concrete togetherness of human beings, as a concrete appearance, so to speak. So it pertains to a decision, if you like, of appearing together. And this is why I think it becomes a performance as well, because it implies this decision of stepping into a space. But we'll see that it becomes intersubjective and reciprocal in a certain sense. So what Arendt talks about in the origins, again, the decline of the nation state and the end of the rights of men, is that we became also aware that after all the propaganda and all the rise of totalitarianism, the existence of internment and concentration camps, that no such thing as inalienable human rights existed. So to speak, the work that these rights needed to do could not be done. And why is this the case? Like, what is lacking here? Are there not human beings who actually need this sort of recognition, or who actually have these rights just by virtue of being human? This is a problem. So, this is also the part at which, well, she doesn't only do this in the origins, but she also talks about the problem of the rights of man on revolution, where these human rights rest on literally the rights to, so the man's natural rights, and I quote, upon the new body politic after the French Revolution, was supposed to rest upon man's natural rights, upon his rights insofar as he's nothing but a natural being, upon his right to food, dress, and the reproduction of the species, that is upon his right to the necessities of life. And these rights were not understood as pre-political rights that no government and no political power had the right to touch or violate, but as the very content as well as the ultimate end of government and power. So the way in which these natural rights were put forth was in order to literally constitute the body politic. And this again becomes problematic, but because there is no sort of motivational factor, motivational force for these rights to be exercised or granted in certain situations. So what I want to suggest is that these human rights, while she contends that human rights as inalienable rights, grounded in the concept of humanity, becomes an aporia, she argues that there is a right to have rights, and I want to show that this pertains to the condition of visibility, like a very concrete visibility. And this visibility has a, so to speak, ontological grounding in human dignity, where this dignity enables us to recognize someone as a particular individual bearing a social identity in the first place. And this ontological grounding could be understood, because we'll probably have this discussion, it is not just the ontological grounding of the human being as the initiator of action or as the beginning, as being a capacity for a new beginning, but the very urge to appear, and how this urge to appear can be understood in an intersubjective space, so to speak. So it is not just ontological in the sense that it defines us, but it may define us as long as we're willing to grant the sort of right to have rights to each other. So in Arendt's words, quote, "The fundamental deprivation of human rights is manifested first and above all in the deprivation of a place in the world which makes opinions significant and actions effective," end quote. This place is the space in which we appear to one another and become equal. For equality is not a natural phenomenon of human existence. It can only be understood in artificial terms which apply to a certain space in which politics happens, so to speak. And Arendt beautifully explains this, saying, equality, in contrast to all that is involved in mere existence, is not given to us, but is the result of human organization, insofar as it is guided by the principle of justice. And again, this is one of the worldly principles, like of that we share in our in-between. We're not born equal, we become equal as members of a group on the strength of our decision to guarantee ourselves mutually equal rights. Our political life rests on the assumption that we can produce equality through organization because men can act in and change and build a common world together with as equals and only with as equals. And in a sense, I don't know if you ever did this, but in the first version of this paper, there were all these like 6, because like she always says his, and Marx always says his, or like him, men. I think this is more pertaining to, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas, but because it's coming from the German, like just Mensch, like just men, or is it, I don't think she wanted to like endorse like a sexist language, but oh well, that's, you know, again, aside, it's just I wanted to say that. So what we understand from the above passage is that equality is experienced spatially. And this means that those who do not have a place in community, quote, lack that tremendous equalizing of differences which comes from being citizens of some commonwealth, and yet, since they're no longer allowed to partake in the human artifice, they begin to belong to the human race in much the same way as animals belong to a specific animal species. So you become undifferentiated, you become sort of homogenized, you become unidentified. Yeah. So what I want to say on top of this is that, and I think I maybe like 2 more minutes if I do. This is, there, for those of you who've read the paper, there are parts at which I go against certain readings, not because I don't disagree with them, I just want to show something else. But for instance, to take Peg Birmingham's suggestion as the right to have rights to be more than a merely juridical right, she still argues that it is a fundamental political right, it is the right to belong to significantly to a political space. I think this demarcation between juridical and political rights becomes telling in the context of trying to appropriate how the political differs for Arendt from merely institutionalized political practices. So it does demonstrate the novelty of Arendt's project in comparison to Marx's critique of juridical political rights, but still the political deeming that a right to have rights is a political right does not give us readily the extra institutional or the spatial or performative aspect of this right. And not every space, or like not every public space, is a political space by definition, although a public space has the possibility of becoming a political space on the condition of the questions that are raised in that space by the plurality of human beings who are gathered there. So for instance, this is a public space insofar as we appear here, you know, together, but it's not necessarily a political space unless we start, well, unless we all start talking, probably when I stop talking, which will happen, I promise. But what I'm trying to say is that it's not just a political right, or it's not just the moral imperative in the sense of me, in the sense of going back to my own humanness, so to speak, and recognizing that I owe this to another person because of a certain quality of them. It really becomes just performative in the sense of it has to it happens in that space, and if we're to have this sort of recognition, I have to grant that person their visibility so that we can have a discussion. So the space, now the last part, space of recognition. Is actually where I talk about, this is where I'll skip the philosophy part, so to speak, and come maybe to the example that I'm giving. So visibility, again, coming to the visibility in the space, denotes what reality consists of, according to Arendt's account, and because for her, reality is what appears in a space, insofar as it is what can appear to others. And she states in The Human Condition, quote, to be deprived of this space means to be deprived of reality, which humanly and politically speaking is the same as appearance. So I will clarify this point, like how this connects to the right to have rights, briefly by explaining the Roboski airstrike or massacre that took place in Turkey. So on December 28, 2011, the Turkish Air Force accidentally killed 34 Kurdish people at the border. And here, what is officially a border between two countries becomes a social and political boundary, so to speak, between two peoples in one land. And this is due to the incompatibility between the granting of political rights by the state and the concrete recognition of individuals as a performative phenomenon. So the equal rights that are granted to the citizens by the state remain insufficient in rendering an equality of the Kurds' visibility in public space. And again, this public space does not have to be a properly political space. In turn, the kind of violence purported against the Kurdish villagers stems from the instrumental framework of politics inscribed in the homogeneous and universal abstraction of the citizen of a self-identified nation-state. So what happened here is that the interests of the two parties did not coincide. So there was this understanding of the person as a, well, in this case, it was the Kurd appearing or being hyper-visible, so to speak, as a terrorist, which made their destruction possible, even if accidentally. So, and this, I think, is what covers over the Kurds' visibility with regard to their ethnic identity of Kurdishness and deems them invisible as possible political agents in the public sphere. So if the Kurd or Turk or the Armenian or whoever, the woman, the housewife, is not recognized in her social identity, that is, if her whiteness is not recognized, she cannot appear in the political space, and this amounts to dismissing her very right to have rights, the right to appear, which is connected to her visibility. So what I claim is then this recognition of one's social identity allows for the possibility of visibility in public space, and this visibility is what gives us the condition of the possibility of hearing and being willing to listen to them or the other that we recognize. Given this disclosure of one's who-ness, one's own unique identity, which is the properly political identity for Hannah Arendt, can only be understood meaningfully when one can appear in political space. And this disclosure entails a being with others, like a human togetherness that is not about being for or against others, so to speak. So what has been argued so far shows that the condition of visibility can manifest itself in different extremes, like as hypervisibility, which turns into invisibility, or as mere visibility that remains abstractly grounded on an abstract equality of human beings before the law. For instance, again, the Kurd loses the possibility of manifesting her political agency, which can only present itself in a political space, in the plurality of human togetherness. Similarly, and I think this may be more close to home for us, similarly, a homeless person, for instance, who's hyper-visible as homeless becomes merely visible so that her dignity becomes concealed. One's appearance in the political space, then, is not a natural phenomenon, but can only be manifested by a principle of humanity, which I understand as the human dignity that is granted in the recognition of one's visibility. So without going, or like, not dismissing the natality aspect, but still going to a very concrete understanding of how we appear in space, so to speak. And the foundation of this human dignity is neither natural nor historical. And this is the point of transformation in the discourse of rights. So regarding this shift in the discourse of humanity in the 19th century, Arendt states that the new situation in which humanity has in effect assumed the role formerly ascribed to nature or history would mean in this context that the right to have rights, or the right of every individual to belong to humanity, should be guaranteed by humanity itself. While Arendt contends that humanity as a regulative idea could not and did not in fact do this work. But what if we understand humanity to refer to a human condition in which we appear to others in our singularity or givenness? So the givenness of the human being, the differences that individuals have, does not give us an equalizing force of these differences on their own. But only insofar as one can be understood as having an identity, a social one, can one be understood to have this, be recognized to have this right to have rights. And the recognition of the visibility of an agent who can partake in political discourse, then, should be understood as a common concern of all. And this, I do not say this lightly, so to speak, because a common concern is mostly understood in the framework of politics for her, where we act, or where we have concerted action for a common concern, a common worldly concern, so to speak. But what I'm trying to suggest is that while this recognition of visibility of the social identity remains pre-political, or like remains public but not properly political, it still gives us that step of if you like, the condition of possibility of appearing in a political space. So it still has a force, and I think it's an important one. And this is the point at which another principle comes in, and this will be the end, and this will, I think, hopefully tie up with the equal ability that I talked about at the beginning. There is this principle of courage. for Arendt, and for, I think we can all agree with that one, there needs to be some courage in order to enter a public or political space. You need to step outside your door or whatever, go out into the world, or like publish your stuff, get it, trashed by other people. There's some courage involved in these things. But one is, so the recognition demands work, or rather it demands courage, but one is not simply visible insofar as one can be seen, but only insofar as one can be seen as an individual worthy of having a right to have rights. And this courage reveals not only the dignity of the human being, but also her vulnerability. So the human being is vulnerable insofar as she's not just an abstract citizen, who's equal to others before law. However, it is this very vulnerability that gives us the recognition of the right to have rights as an imperative, which is at once a performative, if you like. So I think at this point we've gone beyond what Arendt has given us in her formulation of the right to have rights, understood as the right to membership in a community, where we have shown the possibility of how this membership can be performed, so to speak. And in turn, or like in the end, I claim that we understand, like with a sense of urgency, we understand recognition with and beyond what Arendt has offered us. That is recognition as an imperative that pertains to this right, which is granted by the visibility in public or political space. And as we see in many cases, the ones that I talked about and others, recognition cannot remain an abstract phenomenon, nor can misrecognition simply be understood as a lack of human rights. Only when we can understand the right to have rights in terms of the performance of visibility can we actually empower certain invisible parties, and hence they can recover their world-creating capacity, wherein they can manifest their freedom in the plurality of others. And that will be all. And I'm sure that was much more than 10 minutes. Thank you for bearing with me.
I guess I want to ask about your example,
Yeah.
the Kurds. If we take Arendt to be saying that human rights in the 20th century lost their power or proved their powerlessness in asserting rights that didn't exist, and showing over and over again that what we called human rights were not really human rights. What she suggests is that we actually have to find some sort of a ground for human rights. What is a human right, and is there something that's really a human right?
Yeah.
And as you talked about, she says that the only real ground for what might be called a human right is that we have the right to act and speak in ways that matter in an organized polity.
Yeah.
Thus, life is not a human right, right? You can die in a very human way, and you can martyr yourself or sacrifice yourself in a very human way. And thus, what it means to be human is not to live, because animals live, and it's not to have property, because you can be human without property. What it means to be human is to be able to act and speak in a way that is meaningful.
Yeah.
Well, Kurds can act and speak in ways that are meaningful. They can fight, they can resist, they can die. They are not put in a hole in the ground in a concentration camp, right? What she says is, what we have to, her very strong view is that human rights have to be limited to when you actually take away someone's humanity, which is their ability to act and speak in ways that matter. And I don't think anyone would say that the Kurds have been deprived of their ability to act and speak in ways that matter. They've been repressed and they've been suppressed. They made invisible in certain parts of Turkish culture, but they have a choice. The choice is to accept that invisibility or to act in ways that would seek to make themselves visible, which may be dangerous and courageous, as you rightly said. So from an Arendtian perspective, as I understand it, we would say that the Kurds have lost a civil right of visibility or recognition, but certainly not a human right. And so, first of all, I guess I want to know why you're interested in finding what she would call a civil right of recognition and making that into a human right. What's at stake for you in that move?
That's a beautiful question. I agree. I agree with I wouldn't put it as like a civil right, but I think I agree with you, because I think, and that's exactly where I'm trying to push. And I will not go back to that example, but I'll go back to the Gezi Park protests actually, because this sort of acting and speaking meaningfully matters. But most of the time, I think it does depend on this civil right, or if you like civil recognition, or this like first stage of recognition, which I prefer to be like maybe like this, like the recognition of one's social identity, so that you can, I don't want to say safely exactly, but then you can actually practice this, your action, in a way that will maintain some meaningfulness. So with the Gezi Park, for instance, it was this protest happened in 2000, like last summer in Istanbul, and then like whatever, they were prevalent in like many cities in Turkey, is that where people got together, many different people in their plurality, and they actually, I think that was a very nice example of Arendtian political action. But what happened, and I can even say that it was maybe an Arendtian revolution, just by way of, we were talking about a new beginning, in a very hopeful way. But I think what happened, and this is the part I think I want to push about the civil aspect of the right to have rights, is that the police brutality or the police violence proved to be so outrageous that many people died in these protests, and they didn't need to become martyrs. So what is happening, what I'm saying is that these people were not recognized by the sort of state agents or the government agents to be able to practice this sort of like very basic human right of appearing in public, and acting with a common concern about literally reclaiming a public space, because these spaces are public, parks are public, or like schools are public. So I think that's why I want to push it. Like, I agree with you in saying, like, I agree with you when you say that it's not just like a right to life, but maybe we can say that, I don't know if we can say it, but let's try.
Do you want recognition to be a human right, or is it okay to have it be a political or civil right, I guess is what I'm...
Oh, recognition itself. I don't know if I want recognition to be a right, but I want to say that this recognition has to be performed in order for us to understand this human right, this one human right that she talks about. So this is I think the sort of muddy part, because it cannot be a right, and these were the questions that I got last time. I made it clear for that audience at the beginning that this is not about rights in the sense of like duties and obligations, because it's not going to have that moral or like legal framework, so to speak. But just understanding this sort of, or just performing it in space, in public with others, gives us a meaningful, or the possibility of a meaningful existence. So maybe it's not about living, but if we want to go back, we can say maybe living well, like it's the way in which you can live well. And I think Arendt would have understood it in a political way, as belonging to a political community. I don't know if that satisfies you for now, but
I'm going to let other people intervene, and then we can always circle back to it.
thank you.
Can I follow up on
Yeah.
Roger's question?
Yeah.
To just push you a little bit further on
Of
that.
course.
Because in the example you give of these protests, it's still the Turkish government whom you want them to recognize these protesters, right?
Yeah.
So is ultimately what's at stake for you government recognition of the right of people to appear, speak and act in public, or is something else at stake? And this also relates to your first part of the paper about the Jewish question.
Yeah.
Because are you presenting your argument as a solution to something that Marx does not even see as a problem, but that you see as a problem? Because the whole point for Marx is that we need to get rid of the state, we need to get rid of that kind of political recognition, because that has nothing to do with
Exactly.
the true freedom that we need, or the true interhuman recognition, if you want to call it that, that Marx calls true human emancipation.
Exactly. No, that's again a beautiful question. No, of course it's not just that. Like in the examples, I think it comes out like that. But I also want to say that this actually, again, it's about space. So like, I don't know, this is going to be mere speculation. I'll come back to the Marx part. But the way in which I think something is lost, and we saw this in Chile as well. Like, we've seen this at many other places. But when there are people protesting, like individual human beings protesting, and there's like, let's say, the police force. So in that sense, it's not just like this abstract government not recognizing the people, but the police like literally sharing this space with these people, just thinking that these people are dangerous and hence eliminable, is not granting them the right to have rights. But coming back to the government stuff, yes, Marx does say, I mean, and I agree with Marx, but so Marx says that the political rights are not enough because they, inhere in the whatever rights of the citizen, which is about the egoistic individual, and this is not going to give us any equality.
But they're not just not enough, they're actually counterproductive, right? Or they're actually standing in the way of true interview and
exactly. Well, they're just like a one step forward in the right way, maybe, and then we'll
historically speaking.
Exactly, and then we'll get rid of it. So like I have that part in the paper as well. And like yes, there's this revolutionary praxis. I'm not going to go into it, but so the thing is that, and this is I was just reading actually his some letters that appear in formats. Because I think he sees political or politics to be merely about like state domination. This is why I think, well, for him, we need to do away with this sort of structure. But I think for him too, there could be a possibility of political action or political space in the Arendtian sense if we pushed it enough. Like I'm not pushing it at the moment because I don't think like not the fault, but what is wanting in I think Marx's account is again this understanding of the individual as having the possibility of having public rights or practicing them in public, because people understand political rights, and I mean I have it in the quotes and stuff that these political rights are exercised in the community, in a political community with others. But political community for him rests solely on this domination, like between the ruler and the ruled. So this is why we want to do away with it. So I don't know if he has actually himself, because he has the social universal human being, yes, the Gattungswesen, beautiful, but I don't know if he has the public understanding of the human being, like the public agent. That is not merely the productive, agent. That is not merely the social agent, who has overcome or like, if we one day overcome like the commodity fetishism, so to speak. Does that make sense? Yeah. Questions?
Maybe I'll just ask a little bit about what Mikhail just said. I mean, are you asking for the government, I think this is, I think, the force of his question, if I understood it correctly. Are you asking for the government to enforce human rights? Or are human rights to be enforced by, or to be claimed by the people themselves? I don't know if that was the force of his question, but it struck me that it was.
Yeah.
I mean, in the sense that if we ask the government to enforce human rights, then the rights are political rights, civil rights in the sense of Marx and Arendt, but we're also taking agency away from the people as political actors.
Yeah.
So, Arendt says that when we ask and beg for human rights to be enforced, we make human rights different from the Society Against Cruelty to Animals.
Yeah.
But her claim is that human rights have to be claimed as humans, and thus acted upon. So I'm wondering, your example, and I think Mikhail was pushing on this, is suggest that you want the state to give you rights, which I think is not exactly her position.
No, and again, actually, to clarify further, no, it's not just that, or it's not that. Like I do not want to assert that this. So let's say that the right to have rights should appear in the Constitution or something. That's just, that would not work. I mean, that would not do any work. That we would just fall back into the same like primacy of rights discourse. We all have these rights. We're all equal before law. But that doesn't do work. But I think the reclaiming or claiming of this right by the human beings is what I'm trying to suggest by saying that it's a performance. But the problem is that, and I use this language, I say it's an imperative, but I don't want to say it's an imperative that just falls on me at all times, but only in spaces in which I am with others, or one is with others. So you can then come up with the example of and I had this example in one of my professors asked me, well, how about the hermit, living in his whatever cottage or wherever hermits live in the mountain? Like, how do you recognize this? Okay. how do you recognize the right to have rights of the hermit? It's like I cannot just go knock on his door and tell like, hi, by the way, you have a right to have rights, so like, cheers. That is not exactly what I'm saying. It's just again like leaving people with their own agency, but then also trying to show that just by way of falling back on the abstract, like on the civic or like political rights that we have, does not do the work for living together, like for existing together. I think mostly for instance, when I'm teaching both Hobbes and then the transition from Hobbes to Arendt, like the one of the questions that I ask my student is like, how do you think, or like how much of a public agent are we when we step into the subway with our like earphones plugged in and like we're just either reading something or like checking our smartphones, and we have no idea about what's going on like around us. Like we would not notice if somebody fell. I mean, maybe if there was like a big thing happening, we would notice. But these are like, for instance, public spaces like metros or like stations. We appear in public a lot. But I don't think we assume this sort of public appearance, or we don't see ourselves as publicly appearing or other people's as publicly appearing, because we all want to sort of like give them their privacy and their rights to be liberated from like other people. And I think there needs to be more of a response, again, this ability to respond to your surroundings or to the world around you. And I think that is an urgency. Like
It's a new urgency.
the fly could not appear in public.
No, that was a wasp.
Oh, okay. Oh.
I would not have killed the fly.
But yeah, so I think I want to say that it should be reclaimed by the people themselves, but I don't want to say that now go and reclaim it or like claim it because you have to. But I think, and I'll take this from Arendt, but I think in order to have a properly human, properly political or public existence, you have to do this.
Is there a
Yeah.
Question. So, if I understood the paper correctly, one thing you talk about is how like the stripping of like civil political rights sort of facilitates the stripping of human rights, like when you're talking about putting people in like internment camps during World War II.
Yeah.
But then you go into the part with visibility and think about like how when people are seen as like sort of the marked category, that also it dehumanizes them. So when you talk about visibility and performance, are you talking about the civic, like the political, or are you talking about the human right? That's just something I wasn't sure.
Do you have an example? Because I can speak to the example better maybe. I think I'm talking about both. So like that's why I think it's like there are two stages.
Right.
Which I skipped the first three introductory pages. But there was this very bold claim, because I like making bold claims, but that being seen, because Arendt always talks about being seen and heard by others as this like, condition of appearing in a public space or like doing political action. And I think we just take it for granted. Like we just never question this assumption. Like what is being seen and heard? And I think there are two levels of this, being seen and heard. Which one is the social level, where you are seen and heard in the social space or pre-political public spaces, and then there's the political level. So I think I want to speak to both.
Oh, okay.
And in the one sense, so like, again, there are parts that I mean, for instance, I am a citizen of the Republic of Turkey, so like that is one identity, social identity that I have. I'm a woman philosopher, that is another one. And these need recognition, or like these demand a sort of recognition for me to be able to then enter any sort of political debate, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, and ask another as well. Is it not your speech that needs to be heard in public and your action needs to be seen?
Yeah.
Rather than you as an actor or speaker?
Yes, but then you also want to give that person their sort of self-identified identity and not just dismiss it.
According to you, or is it Arendt? Because
I want to say that we can have it in Arendt. She never talks about it.
Right, because she focuses on
the
actual
political,
speech,
exactly.
rather than on the person with dignity and because that seems to be kind of a Kantian import into her more.
And that's why I said
existentialist,
that's why I said
framework.
dignity should be understood by way of visibility, not just by
I'm not
this.
sure I understand what you mean though.
Really?
I mean, if I act and I put a sculpture into the town, or I drop flyers into the town, I may not be, my body may not be visible, but I'm visible. I mean, in what I'm doing, I'm impactful.
Okay, and that's
So I'm not
ultimately
sure.
what matters.
Well, so I'm just trying to understand your question. I'll let Yaz answer.
No, but go, like, it's not there is no ultimate mattering, so to speak. I think if that's the question. It's,
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an objection, I'm just raising this as an open question.
Yeah, so I think so. The way in which I understand it is, and again, this goes back to the trying to understand the sort of recognition in extra institutional senses as well. So like we're not just, I mean, of course we're always governed by laws, but not every space is like a political space, or in the sense of an institution, sort of political space. But what I want to say is that this sort of public space in which I can be recognized by my social identity becomes pertinent, or it becomes crucial to then being recognized in or like the possibility of acting in a political way. So if I am invisible in one manner, let's say that, I don't know, I'm a housewife and I'm just not visible, like both because I'm at home, which is not the case luckily anymore, but I also, if I'm just seen as that in a certain sense, and not as an equal, as a peer, so to speak, that can appear in political discourse, then I think that becomes problematic. So that way of recognizing the housewife or whatever, whoever, I think becomes crucial in actually letting them into the political discourse. That totally puzzle you more. Who has the question? Who has a follow-up? Wow,
I think,
and
I think we
Thomas.
might have the same question about
Yeah.
your claim that social identity should be recognized in public space. I mean, certainly as you know, the social is something non-political.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really understand why you would make that claim. I mean, it's about wanting to be recognized as a citizen among other citizens, right? So why would you want to be recognized in your social identity as, would you say, a housewife, a woman? You certainly don't want certain categories to be excluded. I understand that part, but I just don't understand why you use that term of social identity, because that's certainly not Arendtian.
No, it is not. And but I still want to say that it's like a hidden premise, like it is actually there. So I think the force of it comes from, first of all, I'm not just saying that it is as citizens that we should, because for instance, I'm not a citizen here, like for instance, and it doesn't have to be always within this framework of like being granted certain rights by the state. But surely the way in which I want to understand this sociality or the other identities is to make possible, like to sort of put into place like the embodiment of the human being. Because it is not just, and I'm not trying to say, and I know that Arendt doesn't say this, and I never would say it either. Like it's not about your interests being furthered. Like I'm not saying that I should be heard as a certain social identity, hence that my interests should be satisfied, or like all of my interests, singular or like collective interests, should be satisfied.
So it's not identity politics?
No, it's not. No, that is not what. That is exactly what I'm trying to actually like go beyond, or like I'm.
Why then still use that term of social identity?
Wouldn't it help to remember?
Do you have a better one? Because I can use another one.
Well, I don't understand what's behind it. So, what do you want to be recognized exactly in public space?
Can I ask a question that might help or may not? You
Yeah.
tell me if this is
Yeah.
the answer you would give.
Tell me.
Which is when Arendt says, when I'm attacked as a Jew, I respond as a Jew. There are times when I have to take my social identity as a Jew, or as a woman, or as a housewife, because it's politically relevant, and be recognized for that in the public sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And when I give my Sunning Lecture Acceptance Prize in Copenhagen, yeah, I come to Europe as a Jew, not as an American, not as a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when my social identity has to have political relevance, and I have to have the right and the confidence and the courage to enter the political in my social identity.
Is that what you mean?
Yes, I agree with that, and I think it also goes back to the part where it's, so when I said that if the Kurd is not recognized in their whatness, they become pretty eliminable, like it's a precarious life, so to speak. And I think that may be the other instance. So like, it's not just,
But-
it is like giving one the room or like the space to be able to speak for themselves.
But isn't the problem precisely because they're merely seen as a what, namely as Kurds, that they're not recognized in public, rather than as a
Yes.
unique, distinct who, as she makes this.
Well, yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that they're not even recognized as that. They're recognized falsely most of the time as terrorists.
Well, or as terrorists, but that's also what.
But what is a unique, distinct who? A who has to be at some point, I'm a Kurd or I'm a Jew, right?
And then the common concern
It's unique and distinct.
can happen.
Well, not as certainly not as an individual.
The question is how abstract is an individual for Arendt? I mean, I think that for Arendt...
Well, it's very concrete.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so too. Which is why I think there's always, I think Yaz is, I think it makes sense to say that there are private
Yeah.
and social
Yeah.
identities that we have to be able to bring into the public sphere.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean ever that the public sphere should discriminate amongst those identities. In fact, I mean, that the public sphere has to treat them as equals. But they're relevant, I think, in the public sphere.
Yeah, and it is, I think, it is this sort of, again, going back to the notion like that I use, and I'm not the only one, I just discovered this, artificial equality. It was used by, I think, Jeremy Waldron. Anyway, but it's this sort of artifice, or like, how do we understand each other to be equal? Because obviously, we're not equal naturally, and this is not just Arendt, I think many of us can agree to this point, but the idea that if I'm just going to be equal in a political space, then I don't know what happens to the rest of my existence. Because, for instance, I am not really a political actor myself, and I just, I like teaching. Like that's where my public, it's not even political, but that's where my public stakes are at. And I still want to be able to meaningfully talk about how this public space still can give us, or like, foster the conditions of plurality and equality, and that was directly out of my teaching statement.
Thomas?
I think Thomas, and then yeah.
I was just wondering, it's sort of a follow-up, but less concrete. So if you can just skip it if you think it doesn't help the conversation. What's the category of judgment whether something is a matter of recognition, of political recognition for you or not?
Mm-hmm.
Since we talked about social social identities being one, but then there's also speaking and acting being one you mentioned. Then there is this space that creates something that Arendt suggests as a space of appearance of the political, which is then closely tied to freedom, which would be another term coming in.
Yeah.
At other moments you talk about an imperative that has to be recognizable, and that has to be present in a way that we talk about a politically relevant moment of recognition. So my question is, so what's the categories to judge whether something is relevant as a case of political recognition?
So I think for that I'll just have to go, for that I'll just fall back to like Arendt's understanding of political action and how it's differentiated from mere, so to speak, movements, which we see a lot of in even our current politics. So the way in which, I don't know if this will, respond, but I'll try. So the way in which we can understand political action for her is by way of the common concern that we have, that we share, that is the in-between, or like that makes up the in-between, so to speak. And there's been many criticisms leveled against this. It's like, what about the social question? So the thing is that she never, I don't think, said the social question is out of it. But the question, or the judgment, or the standard is different. So when we're talking about political action, we have these worldly political principles or political virtues, so to speak, as she calls them, that are at stake or that are in operation, and that is the way with which to judge that sort of action. So it's not about the utility or the success of the outcomes, which would be the generalization of the instrumental mentality of the fabricator, which is the problem that she identified very clearly in the human condition, saying that this is what we don't want is the generalization of the fabrication experience or the instrumentality, because then we lose meaning, like a meaningful existence, meaningful human existence, if we start judging by these standards. So I don't know how the judgment would happen, but it would happen in the way in which we construct or create a meaning, or if you like, produce a meaning in a creative sense, and try to maintain it. And that would happen in action itself. So I can try to give an example, and this is in the epilogue of The Origins of Totalitarianism, where she quotes actually this woman student who partook in the Hungarian Revolution, and it is beautiful. It's what she was saying, and I'll just paraphrase. I mean, this somewhere, but that what we were fighting for was truth and freedom. Like we didn't want lies. But they had lost their capacity to meaningfully exist together because everything was covered over by lies, and they were fighting for truth and freedom, which I think could be understood by way of the principle of justice, principle of equality, principle of public freedom. So that's the way to judge it. That's the way to recognize or understand that action. But again, I don't know if this again responds to your question. I don't know if I'm giving you what you want, but I don't know what you had in mind when you said like what sort of judgment, but
Yeah, we discussed different sort of entities who would be the entities of this active recognition. That is one of the centers of the paper. The state was one that we discussed. The public, in a way, was one. Other citizens would be another. But we have not yet discussed legal code being a site of recognition. So it was basically, I was trying to picture, to understand when for you does this act of recognition actually sort of cross the line from the shade to the visible. And, probably one has to speak, I mean, you're responding in examples, talk about it with regard to specific examples in a less generalizing way. And so, it's more trying to clarify what the intention of my question was, rather than a follow-up question.
Yeah, I think it would depend on the principles in which, or the principles that we find in certain spaces or acts, but I don't have a general theory about that.
Yeah, I have a question. I just want to clarify, because I was late, and the first sentence I heard from you is that you said Marx, his understanding of human rights is kind of like on individualist level, is like about domination and ruling. I just want you to clarify that, because if you think about the example of like the class struggle, like the proletariat, like working in this factory being exploited, they are definitely visible to each other. They definitely appear to each other in such a both public and political space. And the way that they recognize themselves and each other is definitely it's definitely happening within a political community. So I don't know why you say it's like.
Yeah, I think there were a couple words missing, but you have the gist, so I'll just fill in the words that were missing. So it is his criticism of human rights as standing or resting upon this understanding of the individual egoistic man. So when he talks about the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and the Citizen, which are, again, for the rights of man, it is liberty, equality. I don't know my declaration as well.
Property and the right to exist.
Property, the right to exist, security, and equality. And then the political rights, so to speak. What he's saying is that these political rights rest upon, ultimately, the rights of the man, the individual person, so to speak, which is itself based upon an inherent inequality. Because it is about the sort of, again, this egoistic individual, or that's the word he used, but it's this individual, possessive individual who has certain wants and desires, and who can choose between the means to satisfy them. And as we all know, and this is no news, that the means are not, like, nobody talked about the social equality about the means. Lefebvre, however you say his name, has this, The Coming of French Revolution, where he talks about, actually the people who are writing this, they maintained it, like, they just let it be vague enough so that people would not ask about the social aspect of this equality. So that is his criticism. And I agree with you that this sort of, so to speak, like the struggle or the unity amongst workers in, you know, trying to achieve their ends does denote a sense of community. But the thing is that the way in which he understands, and this is the second, pertaining to the second part of the sentence that you caught, the way in which he understands political is by way of the state apparatus, so the state structure, which is aimed at domination. So it is not how people organize themselves, or like it's not about how people live together, but the thing is that it's still the case that they cannot, those people are not properly, or like, yeah, properly human in the sense that they cannot manifest their productive capacities in the way in which that, you know, we would like them to. And this is the difference between, and this is like, there's a long pages and pages of whatever explication about how this political emancipation is different from human emancipation. Human emancipation remains, again, a very, like, not ambiguous, but there's a beautiful explanation of it, but it's like we don't know what it looks like because we don't have it yet for Marx. And my assumption, or like my contention, was that even if we have it, and I think it's a, you know, it's a good way to direct ourselves, so to speak. But even if we have it, I don't know if you could have a political community or political action in the way in which Arendt proposed that we could have. Because then the struggle would be overcome. And I don't know how that existence would look like if we just took political to mean domination and rule over others, so to speak. I think I had...
We'll have last two questions.
Okay, last two, the burning questions.
It's still unclear to me, or at least I want to be convinced, and I'm wondering if anyone else has the impression. I'm not sure what the Marx is doing in the type. I mean, because where you get to, I don't really think that. I mean, so Marx is providing something inadequate, but then you also want to say there's something valuable to his criticism. But it seems to me that what you extract out of Marx is fully negative, and you can get to where you're going, which is like a space of recognition of politics without having Marx in there at all. And in fact, it would be a more direct route.
Yeah.
And
okay.
no, I mean.
No.
Not to say that there's nothing valuable in Marx, but for your.
Yeah, I have a response to that. So this paper, as people who have read it may have seen, is almost if not a 3-in-1, it's definitely a 2-in-1 paper. So yes, there are many more papers that can come out of this, and many people have told me this. And this is where the joke comes in for the video recording. I thought I would self-censor better, but I will not. I just love my dead German boys. So, and Marx has to be there not because I love dead German boys, but Marx, like the way in which I think I wanted to take up the notion of equality is like the way in which he criticizes, he gives us the criticism of human rights, or like the criticism of these political rights, is a very valuable criticism. And I just wanted to show, I think, maybe this is again like coming from that tradition, like very old school, like Germanist training, that it's like Arendt actually has more common grounds with Marx than maybe we recognize, or than maybe we see. And it's also, On the Jewish Question is really one of my favorite texts, and there's just so much in it that I thought I should have it. Because it is giving us something about understanding the declarations and about understanding existence. I don't know if that will satisfy you, it's just, yeah.
I'm convinced that you care about Marx. I'm not convinced.
So the equality part doesn't convince you?
Well, I mean, the sense that we need, I mean, Marx's criticism of liberal political rights, showing the inherent, inequality upon which they were founded.
Yeah.
Do we really need Marx for that? I mean, Marxist criticism is meant, I think, in some sense, Nancy Fraser's way, right, of motivating change.
Yeah.
But the kind of change or the kind of motion of action you have in mind is going in a non-Marxist direction.
Yes.
And so then if
Almost.
your idea of what's valuable about Marxist criticism is detached from what follows from Marxist criticism, it seems to me then we really don't need Marx to go where you're going. But that's another way of rephrasing the same question.
Yeah, two quick responses. Maybe it's the way in which, again, as everybody has their own Hannah Arendt, everybody has their own Karl Marx, and I choose not to read them in this, and that is also in the paper, in this like grandiose, like materialist determinist terms. So I don't think that I have to go that way.
Right.
I think he gives his understanding of anthropology, and I think he gives us a lot of things to make sense of recognition. And it's a paper on recognition, so
Right.
like that's why there's like the Hegel part, and it's like, okay, what did Hegel not give us? And then, but what followed afterwards wasn't just that we're not equal or we need a community or like we need to go like a communitarian or like a liberal route. Because I could have just, as you say, yes, I could have left, I don't think I could have left them out, and I really think it comes from like that criticism, like the force of the criticism. But I think just saying that Arendt does not think that equality inheres in nature would have been just taking an assumption and utilizing it for my own terms, whereas I wanted to argue for it. So I think it's a vehicle for it gets my argument off the ground, but that's my opinion. I hope it does. Yeah.
Alec?
As we sit here, there's a demonstration going on in Kingston, in which the sheriff of Ulster County has decided to check the IDs of anybody entering into the social services office to obtain welfare benefits. And nowhere else are IDs being checked in a systematic way. The explanation is that we may find people for whom warrants are outstanding. This is being protested by a number of people who the sheriff has vowed to arrest if they persist in their protest. What they're protesting is the denial of the right of privacy by the sheriff of the people who are seeking welfare benefits. I mention this only to say that I think that this turns Marx on his head and suggests that his critique of bourgeois rights may meet an endpoint here, where the people who are protesting are protesting in order to engage the rights of those who have been denied property in the social sense.
Thank you.
I think we should call it a good day and thank Yaz, and we can continue the conversation informally over lunch and cookies. So thank you very much, Yaz, for coming.
Thank you.